of Art at Duke University. She formerly served as the Associate Curator of Contemporary Art at Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art and the Momentary. She was a Smithsonian Institution predoctoral fellow at the Smithsonian American Art Museum. And I remember writing in her letter that she would change the museum world. And if they did not let her in, they would be foolish to do so. And she was a 2018 CCL Mellon Foundation Seminar Fellow. Her dissertation, Performing Exile, Cuban American Women's Performance Art from 1972 to 2014, explored the work of 4 Cuban American women artists who used the body in politically explicit performance art. That was Ana Mendieta, Carmelita Tropicana, Maria Magdalena Campos Pons, and Coco Fusco. And at that time, she was the first scholar to critically examine the works of these 4 artists in the context of the Cuban exile diaspora in the US and its historical development, expanding research on the diaspora beyond Miami, Florida, positing how disparate locations produce radically different performances of exile and ultimately illuminate the complexities and diverse natures of US national identity. So she's super, super smart. She is an intersectional feminist and critical race art historian with a focus on modern and contemporary art, including Latinx, Latin American art, African diasporic art, feminist and queer art, transnational artists, and time-based media with strengths in performance and video. She is known for her artistic and community-centered approach, which I can personally vouch for. And she is passionate, truly passionate about the transformative role of museums in reflecting and shaping social, cultural dialogues. Please join me in welcoming Xuxa Rodríguez.
No pressure. Can everyone hear me? Is that clear? Great. So hi, y'all. Thanks for choosing to spend this afternoon here with us at the Kalamazoo Institute of Art. And a big thank you to Rahema Barber, Director of Curatorial Affairs, for inviting me to be this year's guest juror for the Western Michigan Artist Show, as well as thanks to Catherine Ransbottom, Associate Curator of Art, and Miriam Thomas, Associate Curator of Adult Programs, for their steadfast work to connect me with the artworks for review and organize my travel to deliver this talk today, including everyone who just helped me a moment ago with the technical difficulties, because my laptop is from 2019 and she is trying, but she can't quite get there, but we support her. She's been good to me. If you haven't seen it yet, the show, you're in for a treat. But you probably shouldn't take my word for it, since I was brought in as this year's juror and selected the works for it, so I'm obviously already biased. Unreliable narrator over here. So please do go see the show and form your own opinion on it, and let me know what you think. So my talk today is titled Curating at the End of the World, an Apocalyptic Manifesto. And I can feel some of y'all already in the room having a moment. Curating at the end of the world? An apocalyptic manifesto? What does this all mean? Is she talking nonsense? Are we in a dystopia? Is she a witch? Won't they burn her at the stake? I assure you that none of these things are real, but some may hold a grain of truth. However, the suggested meditation, what does it all mean, is probably why I'm captivated by the idea of curating at the end of the world. And I hope you will be too by the end of this talk. So here we go, Curating at the End of the World, an Apocalyptic Manifesto. Do you ever think about dying? Me? I'm obsessed. Maybe because I'm at the stage that human growth and development calls midlife. I think about dying all the time. I don't like to call this stage midlife. I prefer to call it life between veils, or the liminal stage, life betwixt. Within this stage, there are just as many babies being born as there are elders and peers dying amongst my circle of loved ones. There is no greater reminder of the brief blink of a moment that is the temporality of our existence on Earth than the comings and goings of souls on an everyday basis. Some things that are keeping me up at night these days, in no particular order. How the dissolution of US aid stands to negatively impact the mortality rate of millions around the world. How the US blockade at the Strait of Hormuz is impacting the flow of 1/3 of the world's fertilizer trade, which means that there are even more people in the world who can and possibly will go hungry and potentially even die of starvation. AI data centers, all the water being used to cool them, and how we don't have a plan in place for preserving one of our most precious and finite resources. Even the Pope is concerned about AI. He just published approximately 42,000 words expressing his concern 2 days ago. And as a non-religious person myself, I'm even concerned that the Pope is concerned. He has over 14 million followers on Instagram alone. For data nerds, there are approximately 8 billion people in the world. So 14 million is almost 2% of the global population. Someone please check my math. I also think about how on October 8th, 2018, the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or the IPCC, published a special report, Global Warming of 1.5 degrees Celsius. In it, the panel underscored that greenhouse gas emission needed to decline by 2030 to avoid passing 1.5 degrees C of warming, or else there would be, quote, irreversible loss of the most fragile ecosystems and crisis after crisis for the most vulnerable people and societies. I think about how on November 4th, 2025, the United Nations Environment Program published an emissions gap report, which found that greenhouse gases continued increasing, with nationally determined contributions submitted by signing parties of the 2016 Paris Agreement, quote, barely moving the needle, end quote, ensuring that, quote, the world is heading for up to 2.8 degrees Celsius of warming, end quote, by the IPCC's 2030 target. I think about how many people were losing every day to conflict-related deaths all around the world in the 21st century, a period of time when we presumably would have the knowledge and technologies to prevent warfare. More distressingly, I think about how that number has been steadily rising instead of decreasing, and ideally becoming a metric that we, and it's a number that's rising instead of decreasing. And ideally, I would hope one day become a metric that we no longer track because we've achieved world peace. These are incredibly trying times that we're living through, times that can leave us feeling powerless, hopeless, and despairing. So against this backdrop of global concerns, there are some questions I keep asking myself these days, again, in no particular order. What does it mean to potentially be amongst the last generations witnessing the last seasons, the last weeks, days, hours, the last sunrise, the last sunset? Will we know when we've seen these last? Will we know when it's the end? What am I doing about this? What can I do with my life that can be useful and helpful for our collective greater good? Would anything that I do have any impact? Could anything that I do actually help anyone? Some things I'm doing to avoid falling into despair as the news grows more dire every day. First, I'm accepting that I will die and trying to live as memento mori of a life as possible. It helps to remind me that everything that I'm experiencing is unique, that I'm privileged to be able to live through and witness them, and that every moment that I'm so lucky to be alive for is in itself a precious and finite resource that I should cherish and hold dear. Second, I'm reading. So very much reading across so very many corners of the field of the apocalyptic, end of the world, end of life, doomsday prepping, and climate catastrophe topics. There is no subtopic too niche to explore. there's only the need to understand how we've conceptualized the end, how it lives and grows in our imaginaries, what hopes and fears or otherwise that we've attached to it, where we think the end lives. Does it live in the stars, on Earth, within us? And can we fully conceive what the end means for history, for the Earth, for flora, fauna, and for us? Third, I'm speaking about the things I'm doing not merely as gatherings and conversations and plans, but instead as assemblies and conspiracies and schemes to imbue everything with the reminder that small compounding actions have great impact. Fourth, I'm curating. It is such a weird thing to do, but let me tell you about it. It's actually pretty fascinating. So Etym Online, the online etymology dictionary, defines the verb curate as in to curate, seen in the bottom half of this image, as, quote, to be in charge of or manage a museum's gallery, art exhibit, etc., which appears to have shown up in usage as recently as 1979, although we know that the field of our curation is much older than that. It also defines the noun curate as in a curate, seen in the top half, as an ecclesiastic responsible for the spiritual welfare of those in their charge, end quote, and as, quote, one responsible for the care, presumably, of souls, end quote. This definition notes that the word curate comes from the Latin word curate, which means, quote, to take care of, and is related to the word cure. Further, it defines a curator as a guardian, one who has care of something, again, connected to the Latin curare and the contemporary word cure. So here's where curating gets etymologically fascinating to me. To cure is not just to take care of, but also to restore to health or a sound state, and to prepare for preservation. The note here too that to cure or heal isn't etymologically connected with the word physician, who is ostensibly who cures and heals us today, but instead to words that mean to make whole, to tend to, a conjurer, and even to ward off, prevent, and defend. If we synthesize these definitions and origins together, ultimately my work as a curator is to care for and preserve artworks and cultural memory. I take this work incredibly seriously, with some breaks to find the levity to keep going in spite of how difficult the period that we're living through can be. If you know me, you know that I make this joke about having a Ph.D. I say I'm a doctor, but not the kind that saves lives. I'm the kind that saves hearts and minds. And while I say that facetiously, there is some truth to it. Beyond the age-old juxtaposition between the sciences as fields of study that strive to answer the question, can we do this? And the humanities as fields of study that pose ethical considerations such as, should we do this? My training as an art historian has focused on asking questions like, can art help us understand the lived experience of a person impacted by the international relations between their homeland and their adopted country? And how are artists impacted by the social and political structures that they live within as citizens and residents of a nation? I wrote a whole dissertation on this, which is what Rahema referred to, and you can see this abstract here is describing. And the project, as shared earlier, is called Performing Exiled Cuban American Women's Performance Art from 1972 to 2014. And it is exactly as nerdy and as very dry of a reading that you are already imagining it to be. So I don't recommend reading it unless you two are equally as much of a nerd about art and policy as I, and we should talk about that if you are. So because of my concerns with how we're impacted by the systems and structures that determine the shape and constraints of our everyday livelihoods, I'm committed in my curatorial work to acquiring artworks and creating exhibitions from the perspective that a curator has an ethical responsibility to present work that shares information about our contemporary context, provides access to historical and cultural memory, and creates accessible educational experiences for the public. Exhibitions that I've organized have included, as seen here and today in between, at the Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art in the Momentary in Bentonville, Arkansas. The show reflected on Arkansas's history as part of the border between the US and Mexico, when that border actually ran along an east to west axis before the US annexed what used to be Mexico but became part of the United States through the 1848 Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. So I don't think we remember that our borders have always been shifting, that many are relatively new, and the histories of those demarcations continue to impact many to this day. In 24, I organized By Dawn's Early Light at the Nasher Museum of Art at Duke University, which reflected on the 60th anniversaries of the 1964 Civil Rights Act and the 1965 Voting Rights Act against the backdrop of the US Constitution, and how the founding document had occlusions that led to the ongoing work by activists and advocates to expand protections and rights for all. This is almost too close to home as national conversations today continue to grapple with who has access to civil rights and protections that had been envisioned for all. Bringing Patrick Martinez's neons into the permanent collection at Crystal Bridges helped to archive many concerns across the history of the United States, including immigration rights, access to citizenship, civil rights movements, and indigenous rights and protections of water. Bringing Sarah Sudoff's Will You Hug Me Forever into the permanent collection at the Nasher Museum of Art helped to archive international experience of COVID-19 pandemic and the trauma and grief that we lived through in the pandemic's early days as scientists worked to develop vaccines while we lived in quarantine and wore masks to protect the spread of infection. These commitments to preserve and protect artworks that speak to our cultural memory grows more urgent every day as our world in information overwhelm often obscures and forgets what we have been through and the solutions that we found to be able to move forward. So now, here are some questions I want you to ask yourself these days, in no particular order. What does it mean to you to live through this period and be an active citizen of the world? Will you take care of and protect memories and histories and experiences that you've had the privilege of experiencing in this world? How will you share them with future generations? What are you doing about the things happening in your world? What can you do that can be useful and helpful for our collective greater good? I don't have answers to those, except every day I'm trying to do something different. But we can talk about what you're thinking of. Thank you. I think we can hang